I'm going to talk about the impact of land and my thoughts and personal experience about the meaning of sacred sites. Every human civilization, every culture has practiced a direct communication with a spiritual reality beyond the physical material world. And this is something we all share throughout human history, wherever we were. For quite some years, I've been working with states of liminality, drawing on the images, symbols, and signs handed down from the earliest human as our old global visual language. As an artist, I've been working with origin as a key to understanding, and I reflect on art, ritual, and the function of the eye. What is it to see, to be able to see, in relation to the land and the rock carving the rock carving areas as a living archive of images, and this living archive of images part is quite important. And at the moment, I'm working on a book to summon up years of learning. It's a slow process, but this is another story. Our sacred sites in every culture, they are most important at this state we are in regarding the massive changes in climate. And I would really recommend everyone, if you have a sacred site close by, or if you know of another place, could be also on a personal level, I could say go there, talk to the places, open up to the teaching, this connection downwards, inwards, back in time, forth in time is most important at this state we are in. The area I want to talk about today is Tanum in Bohuslän in the northern Sweden, within the UNESCO World Heritage Area. And this place is one of Europe's most significant rock carving areas. In Scandinavian, we have a lot. And Sweden, especially Bohuslän and Uppland, contains some of the largest concentrations. The rock carvings, they are primarily from the Bronze Age, up there, and this is between 1700 till 500 before Christ. And you find them everywhere, carved on rocks and stones, and they are there on a massive scale. There are thousands of them. You can get almost dizzy by just thinking about the amount of time, the amount of work, and the amount of signs hidden all over the place. Originally, they were visible in the open land. That meant that people could sail from place to place, because the sea was further inland and the water level was much higher. But over time, the water receded to the coastline of today, and so the places were overgrown and much more hidden. Today you find a lot of areas that are sort of more touristic. They are amazing, but the figures are painted usually by red color, so they are easily to see. But most of these carvings, they are still hidden. They are hidden in the forest. The forest is changing from year to year. Could be on private property, so you don't get the access to them. I've been working with these signs since 2011, where I made an exhibition at Den Fri on Østerbro in Copenhagen regarding helleristninger and a special area called Danseren fra Jærestad. It's a special stone to the other side of Sweden, at Østerlen. But for the last 11 years, I've been in Tanum for a couple of times a year, working with and learning about the documentation of rock art in connection to a place called Undersløs Museum and the Scandinavian Society for Prehistoric Art, of which I'm a member. And this museum is led by Professor Gerhard Milstro. He's a Dane who for the last almost 50 years did a really tremendous job for the saving of the rock carving knowledge and history. Another Dane, Fred Gudnitz, who was also an artist that made the museum back in the 50s. And he came to, I think it was Hundeby Strand. He came during a summer. He was going further way up in maybe, I think it was Norway, because he wanted to paint there. But he was so amazed from the nature and the beauty of the place. So he stayed there during the summer. And I think it was under this period that he got to know about the rock carvings, and he actually stayed there for the rest of his life. He did also a tremendous job to make people come and see it. He wrote to Asger Jorn, he wrote to Globe, who's a Danish archaeologist, most famous one. He's also been writing a lot of books. He really did, he wrote to people all over Europe, come and see, because this is most amazing. So he also did a tremendous job. Since the beginning of time, we have sought this sacred dialogue with nature for wisdom and power. Our collective narratives are all shaped by nature, and such an attunement of the relationship with the local was actually basis for our survival, even under extreme conditions. And I think this teaching reminds us that immaterial and the material world are not separate and opposite positions. They are different revelations of the same reality. We are both physically and spiritually connected to the land. And these images of rock carvings you find all over the world. These sacred old places speak an ancient and global language that we all share. For instance, the San people of the Kalahari Desert, they still use rock carvings actively as their spiritual guides in their shamanic related practice. So it's a practice they brought up to date today, and you can say that you have other places around the world where you have another access where they're still actively used. And if I stand in another part of the world and look at rock carvings, I will be able to understand these images because they will show me the same archetypal signs. I will find sun symbols, spirals, snakes, human and godlike figures, mythologic and ritual practices taking place. It's old motifs that carry a shared global narrative. They seem to be part of the human mind from the beginning of time. A picture can be seen and understood in a single moment as a kind of holistic recognition, but with the written word, we have to build a meaning sentence by sentence in order to create an understanding, and we also have to translate. I'm building a meaning word by word, but if I showed you a picture, you would see it at once. But these two ways of perceiving between the picture to the written word, they are really two different ways of thinking. And being an artist, I have a fairly fluid movement between my right and left brain hemisphere. But throughout our school system, through all forms of education, we learn to set aside all kind of creative expressions and we prioritize certain kind of rational knowledge which belongs to the left hemisphere of the brain. And that, of course, comes at the expense of development of the intelligence and the access to the world of the right hemisphere, which is a much more holistic approach. And I believe we are paying a very high price for that by now. We are standing in a time that really needs a holistic approach to life. Many people want to return to a deeper meaning, but they find it most difficult to walk the talk because they don't have the tools to do so. And still our culture has this blind spot. We have a lot of blind spots, but this is one of them. We are being stuck in a kind of intellectual arrogance that cannot surrender and admit we need other kinds of knowledge to help us. And as an artist, and I'm also a seer, I saw things from childhood, and it was not till I was, I think, teenager, I found out that this was not the ability for people around me. I thought this was the way everyone would look at the world. But I quite often meet this attitude on a personal level. And most people consider art as something exclusive and just for fun and entertainment. They think it's fantasy, far away from reality, so it's not really that important. But the same people might sit in front of the television night after night as zombies, totally sucked into a kind of awful serials with no real spiritual nutrition. And at the same time, this kind of arrogance often reveals a deep fear of chaotic states, of our animal instincts, and other states of being out of control. But the fact is that art and artists are in fact masters of navigation in chaos. It is a mastery of an open mind. And this is why you always find the visionaries, thinkers, and all the artists a little bit ahead of time. They are the first movers in almost every culture. They can deal with a kaleidoscopic blik, seeing things from different angles. And I think this is a characteristic we should never forget. And it would be great if we started talking about this as a certain kind of intelligence, because saying this is another kind, but a specific kind of intelligence, we would be listening more careful to the knowledge or the teaching of this approach to the world. But all this altogether raises a lot of questions in order how we can deepen our language to other forms of knowing. How can we understand ourselves as human beings in a time when the world is collapsing and shifting beneath our feet? And what is the world actually asking us to do right now? These kinds of questions are the core of my research over the last 11 years in the petroglyph area of Tanum. And almost every spring I help clear the stones to prepare them for the documentation of the summer, brushing, cutting branches, removing moss, all to make the carving visible again. And this made it possible to get to know the land, to return to the stones again and again, watching how figures emerge differently under shifting light, under rain, under shadow and season, and getting to know the spirits of the place. And I also can see, looking back in time, that this kind of dialogue is so associated to my ability to be open, my state of inner mood, and the direct talk, sensing the place. And working among a small group of other people, mostly archaeologists, architects, and other artists from all over Europe, I actually have a strong sense that we walk the footsteps of people from thousands of years ago. They have done the same work, cleansing the stones before every ceremony. And this is a very direct way to feel the chain of connection. I actually think it's the essence of what Robin Wall Kimmerer speaks about. Don't forget the connection forward, of course, but don't forget the connection backwards. Don't break the cycle, don't break the chain. We all have a path and ancestral knowledge to guide us by now. And until we really understand this and pick up their knowledge, it will be difficult to be moving on into a better future. Nissen følger med, som vi siger på dansk. There is a kind of intelligence that precedes writing, precedes science, and precedes a modern separation of mind. And it's an intelligence that moves with the land. It's the old anima mundi, shaped by wind, hunger, migration of humans and animals, and the long apprenticeship of generations. Our ancestors lived by this form of knowing. It was not conceptual, it was direct, it was relational, It was a way of being in a deep intimacy with a more than human world. And to work at these places with these ancient carvings, it's an invitation to step closer into this kind of old intelligence. And you have to listen, you have to be careful step by step. Nature is woven into the very structure of our knowing. We are nature, and when we lose our touch with nature, we lose the ground beneath us, the quiet centers of who we really are, and this is of course most fatal. So one of the main questions is, how do we return to a relationship, not as some kind of pompous charity, not because we are saviors in the sense that we have to help the poor nature. I really feel most uncomfortable the minute I sense this approach, and during the last couple of years or many years, I met this approach at certain groups working with climate change. We're here celebrating Naturens Grundlov, and it's of utmost importance that nature's rights are written into all forms of laws and legislation. And many countries have already taken that stand, and they are steps ahead, and this is really great. But I feel it most important to say that we must never forget that it is nature. It is the land itself that has always set the law for us. Since the beginning of time, our actions of the last couple of centuries now return to us like a circling boomerang, reminding us that nothing we do falls outside the weave of the living world. And this knowledge of the weave, this close connection of the living world, is an essence of a long old spiritual Nordic tradition. Nature, she reveals her boundary with quiet certainty, even when our eyes refuse to see it. And now, as climate change becomes undeniable, we stand at a threshold where all familiar things, all ways, are beginning to lose and fall apart. And it's also for this reason we are here today. And those forces, they are already moving, they are already unfolding, and the forces of nature are quite immense. They are vast beyond anything we know of. That knowledge is the essence of the ancestral teaching. This does not ask us to abandon our modern technology, but it certainly asks us for a different orientation, one in which knowledge is not extracted, but received. It's not imposed, but it's co-created. It's also with a more humble way of listening. The task of our time is highly to remember how to dwell, to be within this world, and to be softened by this attention. And in this sense, the future may depend on something very ancient, a way of knowing that listens before it acts, that feels before it names, that attends before it intends. Tim Ingold er professor emeritus and thinker in philosophy and anthropology. He describes how our relation with nature has been dominated by the intentional. This very intentional engagement with nature is always driven by a specific purpose. We see nature as an object to be exploited, to be refined, to be redefined, as we actually do these days, now, here, or to be controlled for human needs. Nature is always pushed in a certain direction that serves our purpose. But this very purposeful intention made us lose a sense of nature's own intrinsic sacred value, and all the different kind of marvelous, totally marvelous, unthinkable forms of intelligence by which we are surrounded. In contrast, the more attentional engagement is a state of listening and feeling, being openly present in contact with nature without having this predetermined outcome in mind. And this practice is melting the sharp distinction between subject and object. And it's this old ability to feel the landscape before you act in it, before you have to act in it. And one of my theories, and I've been working with children all my life, teaching art, is that we are born into this world with these skills. And I would say, of course, we are. Every child has this deep ability of connection. It's an old knowledge of being in the world, a gift that was passed on, and it's the same old knowledge we see in all other kind of animals. They are born into this world knowing what it is to be them and how to act and develop. And to reclaim attentional life is to re-enter the field of relation from which we have exiled ourselves. It is to understand, as Robin Wall Kimmerer writes and says, that plants are not passive objects, they are our teachers. Animals are not production meat, they are neighbors. Landscapes are not scenery or your new performance location for whatever you want to do. It's home, and not just for you. And I will add to this, you only need to count the number of the smallest creatures in a single square meter of soil to understand that it holds a population the size of New York. So we have to widen our identity until it includes the forest, the river, the migrating birds, all the vivid land around us. But back to the science in Tanum. I'll just talk a little about the ship. I could talk a lot about some of the other science, but there's not time for that. So I'll talk about ship and a little about water because it's most essential. At the rock carvings of Tanum, you really meet the ship over and over. It's one of the most common signs. And I have previously written about the state of water, and being in Tanum, you're in the midst of a tradition where water is not just a physical element. Water is the most important place of a transition. The UN describes climate change as a water crisis. 2 billion people already lack access to safe drinking water, and climate change is just worsening the situation. We have floods, we have land drying out, we have rising sea levels, we have polluted water that makes animal, plants, and people really sick. And just yesterday, I read about India, where people are climbing down 45 meters into a well to get a little bit of water because everything is dried out. And if you just think a month or two ahead, you can really see the catastrophe coming. I also live beside water. It's a small stream in Danish, an å. It's Suseåen that runs through the garden. And every day I can listen to its sound, this soft gurgling when it's full of rushing fresh water. And I see the bottom when the water level falls and the sounds suddenly diminish. The water level is low by now. I listen into the omens of the heat wave that has already reached Europe. And I also see the touch of the dusty color of earth underneath the grass in the garden. On the rock carvings, the ship carries the sun. Many rock carvings show the sun displaced in or about the vessel. And by day, the ship sails across the sky. By night, it travels into the darkness of the underworld. So it's a symbolic journey of the sun's eternal cycle, and by extension, it's the cycle of life itself. The ships also carries the dead, just as we know from later Nordic traditions where the ship was used for funerals, and from the ship-shaped stone settings, as we know from this huge stone setting at Alestena. It's all the way down in the south of Sweden, and if you haven't been there, I would say you have to go there. Go there and sit quiet. And we must remember our connection to the underworld, the deep grounding of being. It's this dark, fertile, primordial state It's a moist and dark place where the seed begins its slow awakening. And in a Christian culture, you always search for the Father hidden in the sky. So the old sacred Earth Mother, the ruler of life and the ruler of death, with her rich generative darkness also beneath our very feet, deep underground, was forgotten. We also meet ships accompanied by weapons, dancers, or ritual scenes. And here the ship is a psychopompic symbol. It's a vessel for the sound, not for the sound, also for the sound, but for the soul, moving between the physical realm and the sacred nowhere. And this sacred nowhere and place for stepping out of time is what I find one of the most essential functions of the rock carving science. The image can expand, the image of the ship can expand, and it can contract just like an accordion or like the computer icon. It reveals a hidden content whenever you click on it. And there's a lot of much more meaning concealed in the icon. So when you close it down, it's just a symbol. The minute you click or go into it, it pops up with a lot of more meaning. The ship still serves as a symbol of initiation. Once again, we find ourselves standing at this terrible threshold. The climate crisis is a collective calling, and the ship is a journey we have to take from one state to being into another. A ship requires a crew who are able to coordinate their movements. They have to work as one body, work together, setting sails. And so do we. If we really want to survive, we have to cooperate. The ship is a powerful tool of transition. It was then, and it can be a powerful tool of transition today. When Norse mythology has this unsentimental ferocity, it's linked to the life in the Nordic landscape. Such a life has been hard, so it requires a certain hardiness, otherwise it would not be possible to survive, and many of us would not be sitting here today. It has also required an understanding of the forces of nature, as expressed in the gods' eternal battle with the giants. And this is asernes kamp mod jætterne in the Nordic mythology. And it's not a fight between good and evil or the dualism we are dealing with. It's a condition. It's a deeper meaning of the battle. It's all about the balance between the two of them. And this battle will go on over and over. Völvenspotter, the Völva's prophecy, contains a wisdom of this eternal cycle of life and death and the fight, their inseparable dialogue, their inseparable states of being together. And she is our old female figure of wisdom, endowed with the vision of the third eye, and she can tell us of origin and the end times. Odin's world will perish and collapse at Ragnarok, just as our own world now seems to be heading toward a future of chaos. It somehow seems unavoidable. But out of this, a new green world will arise. But this too must pass one day away. And this is a great wheel of life turning. It's an eternal cycle and a sort of timeless realm of creation. Völven, she sees all that awaits. She does not conceal the chaos ahead. She does not try to hide it. And this is a kind of honesty that can be quite sharp, uncomfortable as a razor blade. But as a seer, she's merely the messenger. But telling Odin even the horrifying truth, she's also a carrier of hope. She is a carrier of hope. The truth is our hope. Truth is always a hope. And this is the beauty of a message with her timeless speech. She speaks directly into the heart of our time. What I see ahead of us in continuation of this thread is a huge collective initiation. And I've seen this coming for quite some years. And you can say that every culture, every spiritual tradition had an old knowledge for how to do so, how to initiate people at certain stages of their life, all the important states. But the problem is that we never practice such initiation on such a scale, and no one knows or hold that knowledge on such a scale itself. And in this way, you can say everything we look into is far beyond the personal initiation. It's it's out of proportion, and this makes it clearly scary. But this is what we have straight ahead of us, and we have to go. We have to keep on walking. I think it's Churchill that said, if you're going to hell, keep walking. So there's no other way around. We have to go ahead. So rethinking nature and the landscape we live in requires a profound shift in human consciousness, in how we define land, and not least how we perceive ourselves in this change. Working on a rock carving field, often the carvings are not visible to your naked eye, and because they might require particular light or time of the day, so it can be most difficult to know exactly where the signs are. You have to get down on your knees, you have to crawl around, and you have to use your fingers, slowly feel them bit by bit, to find what the eye cannot see. And by touching the stone, the fingers dance across the rock, carling the rocks to call the signs forward, to read where a line or curve begins and where it ends. And this movement brings the idea of the sign into awareness, and somehow an old meaning is summoned. It's a bit like being blind, and with great sensitivity, let your fingers sort of wander across a page in a book and feel these tiny raised dots on the paper. With each tiny dot and the fingers moving across the paper, the story emerges. And I actually learned this kind of reading as a child, because when I was 10 years old, I was sitting next to a girl, Helle, at school. And Helle, she was almost blind. And I learned Braille, I think you say Braille in English. And I still have the alphabet on the piece of paper I was given all these years ago. And I really, it's almost falling apart, but I really keep this paper sacred because it reminds me of those days. And when your fingers move across the rough surface of the stone, this searching for 1,000 of years old image becomes a contact back in time. It's sort of the opening to the ancestors who carved the sign into the rock. They put their nose almost, or not almost, they put their nose, they had to put the nose almost into the stone to carve the signs, and crawling around using your fingers, you do the same. And from this position, from there, the gate can open. What I want to say with it is that we might be blinded, but we can still try to feel again. So why did I come back to the area of Tanum year after year, and what did I actually learn at these places? Well, what this area, the nature and the carvings reveal, and why they matter so much today, is that our own cultural sphere, and this is a foundation you find all over the world, in all cultures, once held at quite an intimate understanding of place. And again, and the deeper I work with the Nordic rock carvings, the deeper I feel the archival sources and the felt presence of the site themselves, and I'm really struck by how much knowledge still flows from them. What at first appears as stone and that carved line of figures and a weathered surface slowly reveals itself as a dense field of relations. It shows you a more subtle intelligence of place. And the more time I spend within these landscapes, the more I sense the ongoing conversation about humans and how we came to know the world. And it reminds me that our cultural sphere once held a worldview in which land was understood as animate. And it is. We have living creatures all around us. as responsive and capable of shaping human consciousness. And such tradition reveals that knowledge was not extracted from the world, but it emerged through their counter, through attention and our ability of attunement and the willingness to let a place speak. And in this sense, it's evidence of an older knowledge in which landscape, spirit, and human perceptions are deeply entangled. And to bring these threads into the present is to recognize them again. And it is to know the shifts we see today toward relation, ecological sensitivity, and embodied forms of knowing. These are not new inventions. They are old reawakenings. The rock carvings and the enduring presence of sacred sites all point toward a worldview in which meaning arises from the meeting between the body, the land, and between the human and the more than human. And in Tanum, this is very clear. This becomes very clear. They do not simply depict, they transmit. And they invite us into a different mode of perception. And this is precisely here in this slow and attentive listening to the land that a new understanding begins to take shape. That our future ways of knowing might depend or may depend on our ability to remember what these stones have been trying to tell us all along. To sense is to experience the world. It is the old way of knowing. And the essence of this is connectedness, it's love. Experienced as the deepest kind of wordless insight. Love also means respect. And this shows me why we are so we show so much disrespect these years. We're not loving. Love endures, love sees, love senses, love knows, and love stands up for the beloved when help is needed. At this terminal stage, restoring our relationship with the living world may seem impossible. But this is not the point. Regardless of the outcome, the work remains essential, not only ecologisk, but even more at the level of the human soul. As I see it, it's a form of reconciliation, a way of turning back towards a world that made us to love again, and a way of going home before we have to leave it. And even if the damage cannot be underdone, the act of repair is itself a gesture of a dignity of remembering who we are within the larger community of life. And it's this final responsibility of a species, the human race, that has forgotten its place, to return to listen, to offer what healing it can, and to depart from the earth in truth rather than denial. And I would like to quote Thomas Berry. I made a small change saying she, where he says it, but the essence is the same. He says, we need to see that the sacred is not confined to the human. The larger sacred community is Earth herself, with all her diversity of beings, her rhythms of change, her cycles of life and death. And with this quote of Thomas Berry, I've been talking a lot. I would end. I would like to say thank you so much for being here. I'd like to thank Trine and Jeppe so much for inviting me, and all the people, because I know there's a lot of people around that made this possible. You've really been working hard to put us all together. Thank you so much. You're doing a tremendous job. I hope that this, as it's already said, that this is something for the future, because we really need to stick together and do the best we can.